Welcome home. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are positively into the playoffs. It is a Festivus for the rest of us. Luke is trying to gather up and make his way on his sled through the snow out to Owings Mills for all things Lamar and Steelers this week. And it's football season. We're not doing the Super Bowl this year like we did for 27 years on Radio Row. We're doing a cup of soup or bowl. We're going to feed some local food pantries during Super Bowl week. And I will miss this guy, but I don't miss him because we've become acquainted in the real world. We check in a couple of times a year when he's working on all sorts of things with players. And he's got the one guy sort of not doing much this weekend, taking a weekend off. He is the agent for Patrick Mahomes. He's the agent to the Stars. And I must say, Leigh Steinberg, as I have purchased some 1971 NFL belt buckles from my youth, I must say, and I still tell you this every time, I had a number 10 red Steve Bartkowski jersey that I wore to the skating rink in 1978. Nobody knew who he was, but I'm like, that Leigh Steinberg guy, he represents quarterbacks. So I come at this honest as far as how far back I go. How are you? How's life in Marina Del Rey?
Life is great in Newport Beach, and um, we're just getting ready for the playoffs.
Well, you experienced some fun out there with the Dodgers. I had an eye out on you, and I'll get to some baseball and all of this. The question I had, I mean, I've come to you when Lamar has been between contracts, in contracts. Your own guy, you got him sealed up with the champagne at the liquor store in Kansas City a couple years ago after the first one. I find it fascinating in the new era where players say, I'm not going in the game, or load management, or finding even more creative ways to try to get out of their situation. In your best Jerry Maguire, or are there three different kinds of advice, or is there only one kind of advice you would ever give a player about saying, I'm not going in the game, coach. I'm opting out.
You see that in football bowl games by collegians, but you certainly don't see it in pro football. These players are the most competitive human beings on the face of the earth. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes was injured, but he went ahead and played in the games. The last week of the season, they had really nothing at stake, so they wouldn't risk it. But try stopping players from getting involved. They want to play every play, and they're most competitive people on the face of the earth. And remember, in games that are, quote, meaningless, players have incentives in their contract. Players want to have good game film to show they want to be retained by their team, or they want to be hot free agents. So nobody ever talks about sitting out in football.
Well, I think when I looked over the weekend, I saw a lot of competitive football for a meaningless week in some of these games and saying, guys do play hard because they have agents, they have families, they want jobs, tapes rolling, all that goes on. But now we're into what my partner Brian Billick always liked to say, the season for play and the season for pay. And obviously, for coaches, since I made this date with you, Antonio Pierce has been removed in Las Vegas. So just right before this phone call, it is a wild week for billionaires and the people that they manage. And I'm an excommunicated media member after 4 decades, Leigh. So I know of how all of this sort of works. But when you're getting these jobs and you're given 10 months, 11 months in the case of Jared Mayo, whom the Kraft family knew. It is a vicious business this time of year, and I never mind a player wanting to take care of their body if they feel as such.
Well, in terms of Black Monday, I think this year it's been more like light brown Monday because there haven't been as many firings. The whole key to winning in sports is stability. And every time a team makes a coaching change, it destabilizes the players. It breaks continuity. Players have to do a brand new system. So the real key is to find the right coach. And this year was the greatest example of how powerful coaching is. If you look at Dan Quinn and the Commanders, and you look at Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers, and you look at Sean Payton and Denver, all three coaches took teams with pretty much the same roster, except they got a new quarterbacks in Denver and in Washington, but they had to pick them and turn those into playoff teams. So this is a critical hire. I'm afraid today that we have a situation where billionaires bought these teams and they have a fast trigger finger. And suppose somebody had said to Dan Quinn in an early losing year, well, we're just going to fire you. He never would have got to Detroit the way it is. So having some patience and believing in your system before you rush into changing coaches is key.
Well, you mentioned three guys that have been to the Super Bowl: Dan Quinn in Atlanta before, and obviously Sean Payton won a Super Bowl. So there is a pedigree and a stock, and then Bill Belichick can't get a job, right? And goes to the colleges. So it is, in a way, Mike Vrabel's trying to get in. My friend Marvin Lewis has been trying. There are only 32 of these seats. Not all of them are great jobs, although I have argued with several guys who've sat in those seats that they're all great jobs, no matter what job it is. Even the Browns, even these places where they've really had trouble winning football games. And you do quite, do I have the right coach? Do I have the right general manager? The Giants have done that this week and saying, we're not doing that. We feel like we have competent people here. Maybe we need to change the players.
So it's a matter of changing the culture and turning it around in terms of how players prepare in the offseason, how they practice, how they assimilate the playbook, what they're like in critical situations. And a good coach can change the culture in a team pretty rapidly. And that's what we saw in those three examples this year. And I mean, if Bill Belichick had a chance to coach in the NFL, I don't think he'd be at North Carolina.
Leigh Steinberg is our guest, super agent, and our friend who visits with us from time to time. It is a great week, Pittsburgh, Baltimore week. We got a lot of things going on with contracts and the time for pay, but there is the play of what's going on the field. From a players association angle, and from going back to Steve Bartkowski and unionization and everything that's happened, what I see in Baltimore is a team that came here 30 years ago under the we're small town. Art was trying to find a new life here and all of that, to this thing where it really feels like 32 international silos that seek to play in Mexico City, Brazil, all led by Roger, all led by money, all led by Amazon, and an international culture that the man who saved my wife's life is a German. I'm going to call him a kid now. He's in his 30s. He was 19 when he saved her life. But when he wrote to me as an American identifying what an NFL fan he was. And I thought, he's got to be the only 19-year-old kid in Germany that's watching. No. I mean, I know you've been over there. I know you've had symposiums all through Europe. And seeing it catch on, are you satisfied with how much money the players are getting, by and large, and the way that it has been distributed over your 50 years of doing this, Leigh?
So right now they have a revenue split, which gives the owners 53% and the players 47%. There was a time before the last collective bargaining agreement, the one before this, there was a time back in 2010 where the players were getting 55% and the owners were getting 45%. So I'd rather that split be more heavily in favor of players, but the amount of money is astronomical, and it's mostly because of television. 71 of the top 100 shows last year, Nielsen rated, were NFL football broadcasts or pregame or postgame shows. And that means that football is not only the most popular sport in this country by 2-1, it's the most popular form of televised entertainment. And because of that, the TV contracts are stunning. And the amount of revenue coming into the sport is massive, and that doesn't count stadium revenue and naming rights and merchandising and memorabilia and all sorts of things. In terms of overseas, um, remember that the sport the world cares about is soccer. And so, and
Find
football,
that out next year when we get the World Cup here, right?
exactly. And so in America, the NFL dominates, and after that, college football. But overseas, it's soccer. But they're doing the best thing they can by playing in Brazil and playing in Europe and having a number of games in London because to really get the sport to catch, you've got to start at a younger level. And they would need to develop youth leagues in all of those places because if you've played the sport yourself or seen it played live, you have a better attachment.
Leigh Steinberg is our guest. Are you shocked by it? That would Pete Rozelle come back and be shocked by this? I often think I lost John Stedman a quarter of a century ago. I wonder if they would conceptualize $50 million quarterbacks.
If Rip Van Winkle had gone to sleep when I started with Steve Bartkowski, when each team was making $2 million as its share of the national television contract, and Bartkowski's contract, which made headlines across the country because it was sports economics run amok. Um, he made $40,000 his first year and then 60 and 100 and 130. And he got a bonus that stunned everyone. It was $250,000. Yes, the elders would be in considerable shock to see what's happened. I mean, just think, Nestor, about the changes in college football in the last year. Conference realignment, NIL, and now we have gambling integrated into pro football and making strides. You now can go into the Washington Commander Stadium and place a bet. Stunning. The fact that you'd have a college player making $15 million from his university and that the whole currency of recruiting would be how much money a player can make for those four super conferences. It's an entirely new world.
You pleased with it? Did you see it go in this direction?
No, I think NILs was the law of unintended consequences. They were trying to get a little more money to make it fairer for college athletes. They would have been happy with $10,000. Now you have a player commit a quarterback to LSU, and Michigan alum comes along and offers him $14 million. It's pretty chaotic, and he knocks back his commitment and commits to Michigan. The transfer portal is like free agency for college players. So much of what we thought of as football at the younger level has been replaced. Those four conferences are elevating, so they'll sign all the best college players, and eventually the NCAA will go away for those conferences, and they'll negotiate their own TV contracts and everything else. So it's again a startling new layout in sports.
And as a revenue stream for the league, it's almost incalculable. You know, I have the executive director of the Maryland Lottery on every week, and I'm sponsored by the lottery. I give lottery tickets away on my crab cake tours when it doesn't snow. And we were talking about state distribution in November, December. We're 2 years into mobile here, where you mentioned going. That's in our state, by the way. The Commander Stadium is in Maryland, and it's unique to Maryland. It's unique to a lot of things, not to Europe or India or other places where they gamble on sports in the back, like the way we think of horse racing or we have thought about horse racing in this culture. But the notion that it's been whatever the estimates were in every case, it's far greater to the mobile than any of the brick and mortar ever thought. And then it's just a far greater distribution to here. It's the Kerwin, it's education plan. It's a lot of different things that the state's planning to use this money. But 5 years ago, these hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue were going to bookmakers, the mafia, the black market, wherever it was, whatever that was. It's now been institutionalized right before our very eyes. And Super Bowl winning quarterbacks are given their picks. And it's really a part of the vernacular very, very quickly on Sunday Night Football that I know whether some tight ends over under on 65 yards. And it starts to sound like, I feel like I know more about that than red or black in a casino or taking a card in a blackjack game. It is interesting to me because I feel like I know a lot about football, but I know enough to know I don't think I could ever make money gambling on. At least I don't think I could.
Well, the problem is that it's inevitable that an athlete will give in who's compromised on gambling bets is going to give inside information to a bookie. It's or shave performance to get out of a difficult circumstance. And the thing that keeps pro sports and collegiate sports hopping is your assumption that the games are real and played on an even playing field. And if all of a sudden we have one of these things, and we came close with Porter in being kicked out of the NBA for revealing prop bet information, and we came close with Shohei Ohtani, but sooner or later there's going to be an incident, and it will shake the foundation of sports, and it's an existential threat. So that's something they didn't factor in. To say nothing of the fact that we are going to create out of this with the ubiquitous nonstop advertising for betting, a whole new generation of gambling addicts.
Well, and also folks that aren't into Baltimore on my chest, or I like this or I like that. They just want to win their bets. And I do feel like the stadia in a general sense are emptying out, and the appetite for attending is less than it used to be. Certainly in my city, it has been, and we have a very successful football team and a very successful baseball team here all of a sudden. Leigh Steinberger's our guest. He's going to be doing some stuff that the next time I have him on, hopefully in and around the Super Bowl and my cup of soup or bowl as well. I wanted to talk a little baseball with you because I think top to bottom, when I was thinking about you today, it's like I could do Mahomes or I could do Lamar, I could do contracts or any of that stuff, but I wanted to take more big picture with you about the NFL and its growth that you've been a part of. And I know you've been involved in baseball. You already said Ohtani to me, and my last name's Aparicio, so I come at this honestly. The stability of Major League Baseball. Mr. Big Pants here, Rubenstein, Medal of Honor this week, $2 billion, buys the team. They've spent no money in the offseason. They've made very few structural changes. They have this incredible $300 million lean with Masson and the network and all the problems they have. They can't figure out how to get the game to me when I drive to Ocean City on a Friday night where I can just pay for it, stream it, have it. It's been so poorly run here for so long. But the team's good. They get some pitching. They spent some money. They're moving the fences. They're doing all of this stuff. And I always think this is my 34th year on the radio. So I go back to Camden Yards coming online, the strike in 94, Cal Ripken, Angelos, all of that. And I think to myself, if baseball just could have solved the original sin and got some sort of salary control for a floor and a ceiling, something that they never would have taken cap. No one wanted to hear, and no one wanted to hear any of that, maybe even on the agent side. But it really feels like in a baseball town, it's such an imbalanced, it's not imperfect, it's it's flawed. It's a flawed system all the way around. Feels good to be a Dodger person. I'm a Janet Marie Smith person as well. And I have a Dodger hat and I'm good. But it feels like NIL, feels like there's different leagues going on here in baseball and has been for a long time.
The problem is that the major source of revenue in football is a national contract. And the major source of revenue besides attendance in baseball is the local TV contract. And market sizes are just different. I mean, within an hour and a half of where I'm sitting in SoCal, there are 17 million people who live here and can all get the broadcast signal. So obviously you've got that. And then we happen to have a hedge fund that owns the team so that they have inexhaustible amounts of money. So that there is differences, but you would assume if that was true, that the Dodgers and the Yankees and the Phillies would have won the World Series every year, and they haven't. So the truth of the matter is that good organizations um, can triumph above that. In other words, if it followed that payroll was the only indicator of team success, I would agree with you, but it's not. And
I think over the long haul, I'd rather have 300 million in my piggy bank than a buck and a quarter, Lee. I mean, and over the long haul, you're going to make mistakes with money. The Yankees and the team's been doing that, but being in the Baltimore seat and they're trying to sell me tickets and sell me credibility again and not Boog Powell and Cal Ripken and Louis Aff, none of that. Sell me the credibility of a chance to win and what we're doing, and they're not investing in the offseason. I'm speaking your language from the agent side, the Borough side, saying, come on, pay up to get up. People will come out and support this at a higher level, but it feels poor mouthy to me, and it's very easy to poor mouth in a small market where DC got the other team and got the money and to your point, you said hedge fund run. I thought that's what we were getting here. I didn't think we were really getting the Padres or maybe even what the Tigers were for a period of time. But I did think that buying a depressed franchise for $1.8 billion that was coming with $600 million in civic money to fix up Camden Yards, that wasn't coming with any encumbrances of contracts other than maybe Chris Davis and the Bobby Bonilla day or whatever, but nothing, that was real money, sunk money. And this brand with all of this potential, I just sort of thought they would go 100 million further in every year on payroll the first 5 years just to spiffy the place up and think like, let's get in here and be maybe not a heavyweight, but let's go in and play. And I don't want them to be the Mets. And I'm not talking fanboy. I'm talking perception of what the franchise is. And it is being held back by real revenue, right? The real revenue is there's not a lot of real revenue. And I think Mr. Rubenstein knew that coming in, but there is that point that if they're only going to spend to what they're making here, it's not going to go well, Lee. I mean, I live here. I know that. And that's unfortunate.
I follow you, except it goes the other way because what you can do in football, in baseball, which you cannot do in football, is sell more seats. So the truth is, because there are 81 home games, you can increase attendance and increase your revenue base. Basically, NFL franchises are completely sold out and they sell out every weekend across the country. But baseball doesn't. And the other thing a team like the Dodgers do is they turn out 50,000 fans a night. And so that stadium's filled. I grew up a Dodger fan, and you would go to games. They built a cultural tradition where you went to a Dodger game. It didn't matter who they were playing or who was pitching. It was just the experience of going to the stadium. And they sell out. Even the Angels, that are a very poor team, does very well in attendance. So you have to build that culture going to the ballpark. And how they built it was Little League nights and AAA student nights and Rotaries nights and Kiwanis nights. And so part of it's building into the community.
Well, I love a night at Chavez Ravine with the sun setting. So you'll get me out there for that. Lee, I always appreciate your insights on all of this stuff and how the money has grown and you've been such a part of it. Tell me what good work you're up to. I know you're doing something at the Super Bowl, and I know you're always working on player safety and on the future of players and keeping their earnings and just doing good things for players, all the people that you've represented all this time.
So I'm in the process of putting a concussion foundation together. It's not quite ready. And it will focus on long-term player health, which is focus on awareness, prevention, and cure with the specter of athletic concussions, which is not just the knockout blow. It's the fact that in the inception of every play, when a lineman hits a lineman, it produces a low-level subconcussive event, a little bit of change. But you could have an offensive lineman who plays in high school, college, and the pros, who would have 10,000 subconcussive events, none of which have been diagnosed, none of which he's aware of, but the aggregate almost certainly does the same thing as getting knocked out 4 times. We're planning our Super Bowl party, which has humanitarian awards. So we give them for the good things that an owner or a coach or a GM does off the field, and we'll announce those pretty quickly. We're raising money for the Urban League that helps at-risk African Americans with jobs and all sorts of things. We have a brain body lounge showing hyperbaric oxygen and stem cells and some of the new modalities that are taking over in sports and health and wellness. And we do a brain health summit before it. So we're about to get into very heavy partying in New Orleans.
Well, I would say that's one place you're probably really pleased that it has come a long way from the league being in denial and seeing the old helmets that my pal Dan Pastorini was wearing back in the days of Steve Barkowski, and saying you see all the different helmets, all the different styles, the supportive helmet that looks unique, and it almost makes me giggle a little bit, and I think, why don't every one of them, if that was my son, if that was my brother, if that was I would want them to wear that. And I think we've come a long way on thinking about head trauma and thinking about brain injuries maybe a little bit differently as well. And we'll wish Jalen Hurts well to get back on the field the next couple of weeks as well. Leigh Steinberg is here, super agent, our friend out in California. Got to let him go because he's got too much sunshine out there and too much after party fun with all that Dodger fun out there. Leigh, I miss seeing you at Super Bowls, but I'm pleased and privileged and always honored that you take a little time and spend with us and our audience here in Baltimore. I appreciate you.
My pleasure, Nestor. Best of luck to you.
And I'm not going to wish Patrick Mahomes any luck here before 2 weeks from now. I'll deal with you later on that. I am Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore positive.